All right, and Gwen, we just want to make sure that you can unmute. You should be a co-host.
Got it.
Perfect. Excellent. All right, gang's all here. So Libby, I will start up in about a little, but just about 2 minutes. And we invite folks to turn their cameras on. This is a session about communications, so feel free to turn your cameras on if you are able and are comfortable doing so. It helps to keep a more of a conversational atmosphere with our speakers. We are at about 3 o'clock here on the East Coast of the United States, and we welcome back some of our 2,000 plus registrants for the Spectrum Conference to the Penn Ultimate session, and one that I am very excited about. It has been an incredible week. I just want to give, because this is my last time getting to start one, a shout out to the team who put this together from our Arrive Center at SUNY, and just the incredible amount of work that goes on before the conference begins, during the conference, and after it ends every night. Kudos to all of them. You've seen Elizabeth, but Phil and Roma and Joelle and everybody who's really been working so hard to make this conference go. I am so excited about this session as we start. There was an old movie, Field of Dreams, where the idea in Field of Dreams was if you build it, they will come. We have spent an entire week, our 4th year of establishing very clearly that all the data shows that our LGBTQIA plus colleagues and students experience violence and harassment at an elevated rate compared to everyone else. So why haven't we fixed this? Why haven't we stopped this? Why isn't the government moving hell and high water to address this public health epidemic? And one of the things that we've learned is that it's not just about having the data on your side, and it's not just about having the right thing to do on your side. It's about communicating that message in an effective way so folks understand it, so they adopt it, so they see it as something that is crucial to them, and they can make the kind of changes that we want to make. And so we have an all-star panel of communicators here to talk about it. And our great friend and colleague, Libby Post, is going to start us off and introduce the panel. Before she does, from a point of personal privilege, although we're excited to have all of our speakers here, I do want to give a quick shout out to Gwen Wright, who has been with us since the beginning, who has spoken at numerous Spectrum conferences and our prevention series and the Prevention Summit. And I can't even count how many meetings and conferences and webinars she has attended and supported us on. And so great to have you back. What a dear friend to the program. And speaking of dear friends to the program, one of the people who was in the room when we started working on what would become our policies and the Spectrum Conference is Libby Post, the founder of the original Empire State Pride agenda. You'll like I made the distinction, a longtime activist, a SUNY grad, and a winner of multiple awards from the University at Albany, and a faculty member and a political activist, and all sorts of other stuff. Please welcome back to Spectrum, Libby Post and the panel. Libby?
Thank you, Joe. I'm going to hire you as my publicist. I've decided that's the end of that conversation. Uh, Before we start, I meant to say this yesterday. For those of you who are in the room, you know, I got my start doing student politics here at U Albany and what used to be called SASU, which was the statewide lobby organization. And I was flabbergasted 4 years ago when we did this first one of these, and I got to moderate the president's panel. And the idea, because when I started this work in '78, the idea of being out, period, on campus was a bit of a challenge. But the idea that there were 4 out SUNY presidents was just so incredible to me, and it still is. And we still have some of them are still around. A couple of them have gone to different places, but it's really great. And this conference is really so important because it raises the issue to a level that if this conference wasn't happening, these issues would not be on the radar in the SUNY system. And you know, it's 64 campuses, it's hundreds of thousands of students. We make up a good chunk of those students, and it's really, really important for our issues to be seen as being important. And as Joe said, he just doesn't understand why the government isn't taking care of this issue right off the top. So I'm just going to introduce quickly the folks that are with us today, and I am hoping that you all, each one of you will also say a few words about yourselves, and then we can get into the conversation. And this is about finding your advocacy voice. You know, we can have all the good intentions in the world, but if we don't advocate, if we don't speak out, nothing is going to change. So we have with us today Cristina Herrera, who is the CEO and founder of Trans Latinx Network out of New York City. We have Matt Foreman, who, oh my God, Matt, uh, Heritage of Pride, Pride Agenda, Hodge Foundation. I'm sure I'm missing something, but you'll fill it all in. Matt's been a longtime LGBT activist in the community. We go back as far as when I was doing this work in the '90s. Melissa Sklarz, who's a transgender activist, was active in lots of different things. You're a district leader, I think, now in New York City, and works for SAGE, which is Senior Action to Gay Environment, to make sure those of us who are aging out have some services when we need them. And then the incomparable Gwen Wright, who is my personal friend, which is a lovely thing. But she was the director of the Office of the Prevention of Domestic Violence for many, many years, worked in domestic violence settings, has been a great friend to this conference, and is now in her second life running for office. She's running for Rensselaer County Executive across the river from here. And you know, we think we're going to have a new county executive in Rensselaer County, and it would be a wonderful thing because the guy who's there now is Trump Jr. So I'll leave it at that. So Cristina, you just want to say a few words about who you are, other than what I said, and everybody else gets to say a few words, and then we'll get into it. So Cristina.
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I really appreciate it, Libby. So I'm Christina, as mentioned, and I'm a trans Latina immigrant. I'm from El Salvador. I've been doing nonprofit work for over 20 years, and something that I want everyone to know is that I'm here, and I think every day that I breathe is a day to advocate for my community. So that's exactly what I'm doing. Thank you.
Matt.
Hi, Matt Foreman. I just counted up on my fingers. This is my 43rd year of advocacy within the LGBTQ community, and 30 years of paid employment doing that. I think I'm one of the maybe 10 people in the whole country that's actually made an entire career off the backs of the gay community. So I feel very, very privileged.
Melissa.
Thanks, Libby. So my name is Melissa Sklarz. I live here in Queens, although I did go to SUNY Albany for a bit. I transitioned a little over 30 years ago, and I'm the first trans person elected to office in New York State. I've been on the last 4 Democratic conventions. The last one is a delegate from New York. first trans person in the Electoral College. I'm currently an elected Democratic district leader here in New York. I ran for assembly in 2018. I did really well, but I lost. I am currently at SAGE, the Senior Government Relations Strategist, and I've known Christina and Libby and Matt for a very long time.
And Gwen.
Thank you, Libby. Hello, everyone, and welcome. And thank you for that wonderful introduction, Joe. I so miss my collegial work with SUNY. It really is one of the things that I missed since I retired. As Libby said, I was with the Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence. I retired from that position 2 years ago, almost to the day. And since then, as we think about advocacy, I think that it's clear that advocacy happens in a bunch of different arenas. And right now, that arena for me is seeking elected office. I think it's a different kind of advocacy, and I am really looking forward to that new journey in my life. And Matt, we kind of go back a few years, don't we? So it's kind of like a little bit of an old homes week for me to look around and see some of the names of folks that I've worked with over my career. And it is an honor and a pleasure to speak with you today.
Great. Thank you so much. So my attitude towards advocacy and towards life is that when a door was open, I would just walk through it. And I know that that's not the easiest thing for some people to do, but that's how I, approached my advocacy life. And like Matt, I've been making a living doing it, not from the LGBT community, from other things. But, I think it's important for people to just to step up and make the opportunity or make the decision that you are going to step up for your community, whatever that community might be, and not be afraid. And I think the fear factor is really a monumental thing to overcome. And so what I would like now is for each of the panelists to talk about how they found their advocacy voice and how it has impacted not just your life, because clearly it's defining your life, but the work you've done and the people that you've come into contact with over the course of the years. So Matt, why don't you start?
Well, I came out in Charleston, West Virginia in 1978, and I was working for the governor of West Virginia, then Jay Rockefeller, and I had babysit his kids, and he was a liberal guy. Can't believe how West Virginia has changed so much. But anyway, when I came out, I expected to be welcomed, and I was summarily taken from the governor's office in the counsel's office and sent to the prison department, which was the farthest away you could get from the governor. And that was a eye-opening experience to me. And then I started, getting to know gay people in the Charleston, West Virginia scene, and I was shocked about every white person, every white man was in the closet. And the only people that were out were drag queens. And they were the only people I could be proud of. And then I saw the violence that they were subjected to. And one of my best friends there, she died by suicide, and her parents buried her in male clothing. And I just bring that up because I think advocacy, as Libby says, has to come from your heart. And so since then, I've just been involved in different causes where I just get angry. It was, the way the Catholic Church treated gay Catholics. And then I was at the Anti-Violence Project in New York, and the horrendous violence that was being inflicted on our people, and the NYPD didn't care. And then the Pride agenda, where, where sexual orientation were never in the state code. And it took 31 years to just get gay and lesbian and bi people protected. And then I went to the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, and, writ large, and here now I'm at the Haas Junior Fund in San Francisco, and we have a really robust LGBT giving program. But across the country, we've come a long way in 50 years since Stonewall, 50 plus. But we still have so far to go. And the way in which LGBT people, all of us, but particularly LGBT people of color and trans people are discriminated against and have no recourse whatsoever in 28 states. That's what keeps me going. It's just meeting really fantastic people with such resilience and such courage, and being angry about what our society continues to inflict on these wonderful people.
Melissa?
So I was lucky. I had a terrible substance abuse problem and I lost everything. And so I went to rehab, and this was the late 1980s. And I said, I'm transgender. What? I need help. And they went, oh, okay, this is really simple. We have no idea what you're talking about. And they sent me to the LGBT Center in New York, where they had a new program called the Gender Identity Project. And they welcomed me-ish. And after, because I stuck with it and overcame at least my substance problem, and they made me a social worker. I was a terrible social worker. It was hard to stay connected with people at that level. And so they, at one point in this part of New York City in Greenwich Village, they did a town hall about an anti-transgender prostitute town hall. And they looked around and they said, you have a big mouth, you should go. And I went to a town hall with 200 people, all of them complaining about transgender people selling their bodies in Greenwich Village. And I was the one to stand up and harangue and denounce and rage. And rather than get angry with me, they got even and they put me on the community board. And really that was how it started. And what I've discovered is it's really easy to be the first. You know, we're talking about getting involved in community engagement, like now as a trans woman for 25 years. And so when we think back to trans involvement and trans visibility, in those days, it was very, very limited. And so it's easy to be the first. The real key to being an advocate is to work really hard not to be the last. And I'm very, very pleased that I worked hard not only to get access into different places and different rooms, but to hold the door open for others. You know, I've been able to help a new generation of trans women and men get access in New York. And now we have this fierce political advocate community, not only in New York, but all over the country. You know, I was part of the first cohort at the Democratic Convention in 2004. I think there were 6 of us that were trans-identified nationwide. And in 2020, at this last convention, there were over 40 of us. So on that level, we introduced trans community, trans issues to a political community, to liberal neighborhoods. We carried our message. We brought trans rights to New York City. And then, as Matt can certainly remember, it's like, oh, this is easy. Let's bring it to New York State. And it took 18 years to get our trans rights bill passed in Albany. We did everything possible. But here's the funny thing, that in retrospect, now that gender is the law of the state, passing the law is actually the easy part. Now comes the hard part, which is changing the culture. And so it's like a relay race. And so what I'm here today is to hand the baton to all of 192 of you. So I did the easy part. I spent 18 years of my life bringing trans rights into the legality of New York. Now, what you're going to do is change the culture. You are now all trans advocates going to change the culture and make sure that trans people and trans people of color are safe and protected and have access to school and healthcare and jobs and are safe and part of our community at large.
Gwen?
Thank you. So my trajectory was probably a little different. When I came out back in 1982, I came out into a pretty white feminist world. I was a mom with three young children, including an infant, and so it took me a minute to really figure out what that meant and to find voice. But I was engaged in the anti-violence against women movement, and what I realized by looking around the room, no matter where I went, no one looked like me. There were no people of color. The lesbian, gay, let alone trans or anything else, were so minimal that it became clear that we had to start talking about intersectionality and about who we're leaving behind. And I knew that if I didn't speak up on behalf of the communities that I represented, there was no one else in the room to do that. And so that's how I found my voice. I found my voice by recognizing that if not me, then who? And that I was, not only was it my job to do that, but it was my responsibility. It was my responsibility as someone who had entree into various rooms and various places in society to bring along with me all of those folks who had been silenced. So that was sort of how things happened for me.
Christina?
So for me, it was quite an interesting story. I moved. I'm originally from El Salvador. I moved to LA when I was 10, and my family was quite conservative, and so I was looking to find my path. And back then, in the beginning of the 80s, we didn't really have access to like internet. I couldn't really like go to a library and be like, let me get a book on, finding out people like me that feel like me. Like I couldn't even describe what was going on with me. So um, that search was really difficult, and it unfortunately took for me to like move across the country. So I moved to New York back in 1985, which was a complete, contrast at what I was where I was living at in LA. So it seemed very overwhelming, but at the same time, I was like, I need to make it here. I need to find myself. I need to make myself happy, and so as I connected to people who were allies to me, I didn't really exactly know that I was trans. I knew that I was different and I felt like a girl, but I couldn't really describe it. So I started to connect to like resources, and as I began to transition into, living as a trans female, I kept on like finding myself in situations where I was like, to be trans, this is what I have to live through, like seeing violence, seeing discrimination, seeing killings, and like deportations and all of that. And I was like, this is not what celebrating one's trans identity should look like, especially when you're also dealing with being like an immigrant and not knowing, the English language. And so, like the fire in me kind of like grew stronger, and I was like, I need to persevere. I need to make it, because I was seeing a lot of my peers die and dealing with addiction and being deported. And I was like, this is not the way our lives should be. Like, we should be like thriving. And so I started to like push back. I was like, I need to, find safe places for my community. And so I put myself through school. I went to CUNY. I graduated from Queens College, and I was like, I need to get the tools to make a difference. And so in 2000, I decided to go into the nonprofit world, which for me was, I was technically doing a lot of that work like informally as a young person, helping my peers. But I was like, wait a minute, I can make money out of this, and I can find like stable, safe, employment settings. So that is how I, evolve into becoming an activist, becoming like a, you know, like a social work, social services provider. And that led to me beginning to say like, I want more and our community expects more. And unfortunately, we were not really getting the resources from our allied providers. So we decided to put together an organization, which is Trans Latinx Network, where we were like, we want to be able to have access to our own resources, deliver our own resources, and create employment opportunities for other community members who have who should be able to find other opportunities in life. And so that's how we were able to really become the institution we are. And for me, I found like a healing process in advocating for my community and educating and pushing back against those institutions that historically have oppressed us. I was able to really like fight back against like law enforcement, especially in Jackson Heights, which was really like harassing us and profiling us. And now we're accessing resources at the state level where we are able to build more capacity within our community. So a little bit of everything, but I'm very like content that I'm following my path.
So I just want to say to people, if you have questions, just, virtually raise your hand with that little icon that you can raise your hands with, and we can entertain the questions. And, we're hearing about how it keeps people where we came from and how we got to where we are. One of the things that has always not been a struggle for me, but has always been this point of trying to find that spot of keeping going in the face of defeat. Matt, worked so hard to get Sonda done, and it took 18 years. It was insane that it took as long as it did. And there are other things that we've done. The gender took another 20 years to get done, and there are other bills that have taken so long, and other advocacy efforts. And I remember when I was first starting to do this work, and it just and I was a lot younger then, and it seemed, this was in the 90s, and it just seemed really sort of overwhelming at times. And there was a guy named Jim Perry who was my political soulmate, and we did this work together. He died on Gay Pride Day in 91, but he would always say to me, you can do this, you can do this. And that has stayed with me my entire life, that his voice in my head saying you can do this. So I'm curious, from the four of you, what is it? What's that voice? What's that thing that in the face of defeat and incredible opposition, because the opposition is now growing again, what is it? What is it that makes you keep going? Because I think that for folks who are not really experienced in this, when you hit the wall the first time, there are times you just want to say, I'm walking away. And so what is it that makes you not walk away? So Gwen?
Libby, people talk about the fire in the belly. And I really think that that's what it is. Like, you get this fire in your belly, and you can only release it by pushing against that resistance. It's the only way to really sort of feel right in yourself. And for me, again, it was really important important for me back in the day to always ensure that I was not the only one of me in the room. And that was a 24/7 ordeal. It meant talking to people, reaching out to people, mentoring people, holding their hands, encouraging them, writing with them. You know, it really was a lot of work to ensure them that they were not out there alone, because God knows there were many, many days when I felt like I was alone. And that continued throughout my career. I mean, when I became executive director of OPDV, I remember my first sub-cabinet meeting, which was a meeting of all these similar agencies, you know, executive agencies under the governor, and I was with public safety. So that meant I walked into a room where it was the heads of state police, Division of Criminal Justice, Division of Military and Naval Affairs, state corrections, state commission on corrections, all militarized white guys. And it was like, God, haven't I done this already? And what I realized at that moment, and it was extremely intimidating, but what I realized at that moment as I sat in that room is that I deserved to be there as much as anyone else. And that I was not going to be silenced. And while they were talking about their, you know, accessing blah, blah, blah kind of helicopter, which who the heck cared, in my view, because for me, what I needed to talk about were the number of people who were being killed at the hands of people that they were intimately connected with by guns. And you're talking about accessing weapons. So we have to have some kind of meeting of the minds here. And so again, what the lesson to me was that it never ends. It just continues. And so I think it was Christina that talked about perseverance. You know, you don't get rid of that fire in your belly without perseverance, without knowing that you need to be able to sleep at night, knowing that you did the very best that you could. And yeah, you know, sometimes it takes 20 years, sometimes it takes 18 years. You know, I certainly worked on legislation where it took us 20 years to get it through, and legislation that was about protecting people, which is always astonishing to me. Like, why is it so difficult for us to wrap our brains around the fact that people need protection by our government, and we have a responsibility, if nothing else, we have a responsibility to do that. And those are the things that take the longest to push through. So, so yeah, I think it really is about how you respond to that fire in your belly.
Okay, Matt?
Well, I think if you're able to take a step back, and I'm frequently not able to do that, the progress that's been made around LGBTQ issues, people, culture, equality is astonishing. And I think most people, most historians around the world can't find another movement, if that's what you want to call it, that's made such similar progress. It is completely frustrating that 47 years after Bella Abzug introduced the first gay rights bill, we still don't have a federal law, as Gwen says, that protects us. I think we might actually get over the finish line this year, but if you just look at public opinion polling, even on the issue of same-sex marriage, it's at 70% nationwide. No one could have dreamed that 15 years ago. I look at transgender visibility and how it has just exploded over the last 5 years, thanks to the kind of hard decades along groundwork that Melissa and her colleagues did. So we are making, that's what keeps me going. We are making progress. And I take some hope in the fact that some of our staunchest enemies are slowly crumbling. Organized religion is losing across the board, you name it. Even evangelicals are losing adherents. The country is becoming less and less religious. Nobody, except a few people, cares what the Catholic Church has to say anymore. So the trajectory is definitely in our favor. It's just that, they say like a cornered rat fights the hardest. Well, that's where we're at right now. And it's the last gasp of the white male patriarchy. It's going to take a long time for them to take that last gasp and pass out. But I do feel we're almost at a tipping point. So if we can just keep going and pushing and not direct our anger internally. I mean, it's been a problem of every marginalized community, this lateral attack against each other. And I unfortunately think it's gotten worse among young LGBTQ people than it was. And we've always had the problem, but I think there's so much more judginess and condemnation and holier than thou kind of approach. I mean, it's society-wide, but I just despair of that a little bit, that if you're just not towing the exact party line, then you're not a good gay. That's the thing that I worry about most. Of sapping energy out of people that are on this call that want to get involved, that want to devote time and energy, and then are like met with, a very exclusionary view of what liberation and equality is supposed to be.
Yeah, you're not good enough, is what people are met with. Christina?
So for me, it's I'm like I have to continue to press forward. If I stop fighting, if I stop resisting, then what's going to happen to to my community? We have seen what has happened when people don't take action, and when it comes to the trans community, things are really things are really delicate right now. We're seeing that in some parts of the country, it's not, it's not ideal, it's not safe to live, and we're continuing to see so much violence, happening not just from within communities, but also from different government agencies and law enforcement. And so I need to continue to to fight and advocate and bring resources so that we can continue to develop leaders within our community. This work can be really taxing at times, yes, and at times, yeah, I want to kind of burn out, but I know that I can't. I don't have the luxury. I'm like, if I don't continue to do what I'm doing, it's like some people may be heavily impacted by it, and I just couldn't see myself allowing that to happen. And I feel that an area also that I feel is really, really important is to continue to build allyship with other communities, such as the LGBT community. At times, I know that it's hard to trust and it's hard to really engage for different reasons. But we can't do this alone. And for the trans community, we have so much that we're fighting against, that we're working towards, that we can't do it alone. And so we need to be able to harness, good intention from different aspects. Right now, we don't know, like if things really go sour, political, in the near future, that's really gonna heavily impact us when it comes to, immigrant communities. We have already a lot of things against us, and it's been so hard for us to even access an immigration status. So we need to protect what we have, and we need to fight for more. So that's where I stand. But it's really hard. It's a lot to really try to fight against, but there's no other choice. We have to continue to fight.
Melissa, what do you do to keep it going?
Damned if I know. You know, when we started, Matt can remember, we had a meeting with Sylvia Rivera. Sylvia Rivera, what's the polite word, was eccentric, you know, and there was a huge room of people, and we were coming up, this is the late 90s, and all those people, they've all moved on with their lives, and here I am. I'm on Christina's board. Here's the secret: we live in a racist culture, and so whenever all these LGBT victories are achieved, the white people get all the rewards, and the people of color continue to fight. And so now the journey today is now that I have a lovely, messy home that I own, and now I get my ability to help others. I am on a spiritual journey. I seem to have a talent and a niche where I can communicate these ideas to people, and I've had great success. And people say wonderful, lovely things to me. And I used to argue with them. At least I don't argue anymore. I have a talent to explain that being trans in a non-trans culture, what it's like being why being white is unfair because people of color continue to suffer and fall behind, and it's a passion. I'm really pleased that I've been able to pivot, even as I get older, that to be able to support Black trans movement, the trans Latina movement. And, you know, I started out, I was one, you know, Martin Luther King talked about the fierce urgency of now. Young people are impatient and angry. It goes with the territory. It's in your contract. And it's not a bad thing. And now in politics in New York, now I have young people reaching out to me as a wise elder about navigating politics. I like the fact that I've been able to succeed. We have fought in this arena at so many different levels. Again, you know, Matt and I have been on the same team. We've been on opposite teams. We've pretended to be in opposite teams and on the same team. We have argued with so many people about our civil rights, that we deserve basic decency. Once upon a time, our New York State Senate was all Republican, and they pretended to care and they didn't. And they pretended to listen and they didn't. And it was fixed. It just wasn't real. And they knew it and we knew it and they knew it, that we knew it, and we had to do it anyway because we didn't make the rules, but that's how it was done. And finally, New York just said, this is fucking crazy. They're the minority. And now we have supermajority of pro-equality coalitions in both the Senate and the Assembly. And so new ideas, Albany used to be the place where new ideas would go to die. And it's not like that anymore. I still have it. It's a spiritual journey. I don't want to talk about something like God, then you'll all turn off your camera. But for me, it's spiritual. It's doing service. It's selflessness. It's oh my God, I've got a talent and I've made it work, and I get to own my cluttered little apartment. But the lives of people are getting better because I'm willing to do the work, and that gets me out of bed every day.
So we've actually gotten a couple of questions. And the first one is from Alexander Hilly. I hope I said your last name correctly. When was a time you felt most empowered? So is there a singular event that made you feel most empowered, or a time in your life when you felt most empowered? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay.
So for me was back in like 1992 when I decided and was able to accomplish my gender affirming procedure. I felt on top of the world. I was like, with accomplishing something as huge as that, for me was like, I'm like, I could take on so many other things because like I'm complete now. And so that was a great moment for me, and I would always remember it.
Gwen? You gotta unmute.
Most empowered. You know, it's so interesting because I think that there are probably several of those situations, but I guess I would say when I became the executive director of the State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And the reason that I felt that was because I didn't know anything about running an agency. I didn't know where that was going to take me. But what I did know was that I had a tremendous amount of support and backing behind me to take on a challenge that was before me that I'd never done before and do it successfully. So I felt that the empowerment came from staring that challenge head on and taking hold and moving forward with it and being, you know, I was empowered by the fact that I was the first African-American lesbian to run a state coalition in the entire country. You know, that was like a significant pat on the back that I hadn't even thought about it until people said that to me. You know, sometimes it's like you have to hear the words out loud to realize that it is an achievement, and that along with that acknowledgement did come a significant amount of power and authority. I mean, like I became the person that I would walk in a room and people would acknowledge me. And that was incredibly empowering to be able to walk into the room and people would say, oh, Gwen's here. You know, you have to be in that place to really know what that feels like for your entire psyche, for your entire body. It's just like an amazing sense of power over yourself. So that was probably one of the most significant. And it happened again when I was appointed by the governor to lead OPDV. It was another, that same kind of thing. You know, I think for most of us, when those kinds of things come about, the first thing we say is, I'm not worthy. And then it's like, but of course you are.
Absolutely.
Of course you are.
Melissa?
Gender was born in December 2001. It seemed like it would be impossible. And Matt Foreman is a great national voice for trans inclusion in LGBT politics. But before that, there was a good 2-year period where I was the only trans person in New York taking the time to try to go to Albany and bring trans rights. And then over time, the coalition got larger and larger and larger. And then the bill was passed, and then the governor signed it. And when the governor signed it, he was on a stage with about 50 people. And at that event, I had lawmakers come up to me quietly and said, you know, this is all because of you. None of us would be here today if it wasn't for you. You have been doing this for years, and now everyone is here, but there was that time when it was only you. And I was sort of taken aback by that. And, you know, it's very, very rare I see myself like that. It's, you know, no one is an activist for cash and prizes, that's for sure. But to be able to have senators and assembly people go that you may not feel it, but this is actually your moment. I was just really taken aback by that. So that'll stay with me probably for the rest of my life.
Matt?
I think I've been so blessed in so many ways to be able to work in our movement for so long, but I do remember in 2004, I don't know how many people on this call remember this guy, Fred Phelps. He ran a church in Topeka, Kansas, and he went to with these hideous, awful signs, God hates fags, with his members of his church and his children. I've never understood where they got the money, but they went all over the country. They protested, at the funerals of soldiers that had died in Afghanistan, saying that that was God's punishment because America was too pro-gay. In any event, Topeka passed a LGBT non-discrimination ordinance in 2003, and Fred Phelps went around and got enough signatures to put that on the ballot to repeal it. And when I was the task force, we decided we're going to really throw down on this one and put money into it and send organizers there because it's Kansas, it's Topeka, and it's Fred Phelps. And I did a lot of door-to-door canvassing there just to try to get in people's heads, and it's not a very pleasant experience. But on election night, that attempt to overturn the ordinance was defeated 2-1. And I thought, if we can do this in Topeka, if we can do this against Fred Phelps and his crowd and his money, we can do it anywhere. And that gave me a real sense of, it empowered me. It made me feel great. Fortunately, he's since dead, and I hope he's rotting in hell. But anyway, it was a good night.
Yeah, it's okay to celebrate that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to answer, and actually Joe was at this moment that I felt was one of the most empowering things for me. And that was, I was the president of my synagogue, and I'm a conservative Jew. That doesn't mean I'm on the right. It's just what they call our movement within Judaism. And I was giving the first Yom Kippur speech where the president gets up and asks for money. And I said to folks, things have changed. I'm now the president, blah, blah, blah. And in a couple of weeks, Lynn and I are going to stand over there. And I pointed to the other part of what's called the bima, or the altar, to say that we were going to get married in the synagogue, on the bima, under a huppah. The nice Jewish wedding my mother always wanted me to have, but that wasn't going to happen in her lifetime. And the whole place broke out in applause. And that was the most affirming, let alone empowering. It was one of the most affirming moments of my life. And it was really, really great. And I have to say, those 4 years, and I was the first lesbian to be the president of a conservative synagogue in the country. Those 4 years were probably the most productive and empowering of all the volunteer work that I've done. And I was, I did Pride Agenda, I did the Pride Center here for 5 years. I've done a lot of different things, but that was because it was, if not me, who, which was what Gwen said, and that's Hillel said that. And so it really was one of those incredibly affirming moments where an institution that I never expected to embrace LGBT people ever. And I include the T's because we have transgender folks in the synagogue. I never expected that to happen, and they did. And it was just an amazing time in my activist life. And so that was, I don't know, 10 years ago, I think that was. And the other times I feel empowered is when I win a race. I do political campaigns, so I feel very empowered. And I felt very empowered last week because we won a really big race here in Albany. So that was that was really good. So there was a question, and Melissa answered it, but I'd like to throw it out to everybody else as well. And we only have a few minutes left. So the question was, do you think trans programming should be included in LGB programming or housed in the same place? Does that make sense? So Melissa said no. LGBT programming marginalizes trans people. I'd like to hear what everybody else thinks.
Well, for me as a trans individual and someone who has access, support over the years and have witnessed, what type of support we get at times when we're like lumped into the rest of the community, I feel that in a way is is technically like a disservice, especially when there is no need to like combine like different like services for different communities. I understand if it's like a small town in, who knows, Kansas or something, we have to settle for what we can get. But especially in bigger cities and in progressive states that have resources, I believe that trans communities should be delivering services to their own communities, so that we can be more accountable, and we can have better access to those resources and deliver them the best way possible.
Gwen?
You know, that's a really interesting question. And I think that I related to the new movement towards, really thinking about racism and the people who have been most affected in this country and the BIPOC movement, looking at Black and Indigenous people of color as being a group that has disproportionately in this country been subjected to the horrific, just a horrific history. And I think the same is true when I think about the LGB community and the T. I think that sometimes movements start because we all need to be under that same umbrella, but then there's a quiet storm where we need to kind of separate that out. And I, for one, would certainly respect, I think all of us would respect the judgment of the transgender community to determine whether it's helpful or not for them to maintain that sort of incorporated status. We had to do that when we came up with LGTB, because it was the gay movement, and the gay movement really meant gay men and specifically meant gay white men. And so we had to challenge that dynamic, and I think for what it's worth, the AIDS epidemic really heightened and elevated the voice of lesbians in the gay movement, because after all, we were caretaking our friends and family members who were dying in our arms. And so that was one way that we really had to look at how strong that connection was. And I think then embracing trans just kind of went hand in hand. However, I do think that this long history has led to a place where it's easy, and we've seen it both through policy and through practical application, how trans people sort of get left behind, that we have just not done as good a job of elevating them. So I appreciate the need to kind of tease that out.
Matt?
Yeah, I really agree with Gwen. I do think it depends on what we're talking about here. If we're talking about direct services, social services, camaraderie, but the reality of gender fluidity, I think, it's real. And in the last national survey of National Center for Transgender Equality, the number of young people that don't identify as lesbian, gay, bi, or even trans, but as in the fluidity, I'm not sure I'm something the terminology wrong, it is growing exponentially. So, and I just don't think that because it's new, we haven't quite got our heads around how to help young people in their journey towards wherever they're going. And what does that mean for the ever-growing list of letters in the alphabet of our community? I don't know, but I think Gwen answered the question brilliantly.
So now we're going to go into the lightning round because we have 3 minutes left, right? And Joe's got to say a few things towards the end anyway. So in 30 seconds or less, please give the audience the message that you would like to leave them with so that they go out and do the work, and we can all retire. So, Melissa?
Great, 30 seconds. So the battle of our democracy is happening right now, and LGBT is important, but we're seeing the battle, racism has lit the fuse where the parts of the United States are willing to get rid of American democracy. We need you to stand up and fight. Our 2022 and 2024 elections could be the end of American democracy. And so the 5 of us are going to do the best we can, but we need all of you. This is happening. It transcends our LGBT identity, and we need your support.
Matt?
Keep fighting in small and big ways, whatever it is. I see so many people that get engaged in these issues in their 20s and then walk away. And so I'm just asking you, make this a lifelong thing, even if it's only one very small thing once a week. Just stay engaged.
Christina?
I would say get to know us as a trans community, as the transgender community. Make room for us and step back when necessary, and be generous, not just monetarily, but also, you know, with a lot of the other areas. You know, thank you.
Gwen?
I would say that if your dreams do not inspire and motivate you, you're not dreaming big enough. Try again.
And I would say, just do it, as they say in the Nike commercials. Just step through the door. If the door is open, if it's not, open it yourself and step through it and just do it, because nobody else is going to do it for you. So you have to do it for yourself. Joe, what's your 30 seconds?
I'm going to defer to the 5 of you. What an incredible message, what an incredible session. You could see from the comments in the chat. Our group was texting back and forth, but we think we just had the first F-bomb on the record at a Spectrum session. So that's a total Friday afternoon vibe. I guess I will close by saying Libby raised the words of the ancient scholar Hillel, whose words I think are actually applicable to this session. If I am not for myself, who will be? But if I am not for others, what am I? And if not now, when? The need to advocate for ourselves and our own identities, the need to advocate for others in their identities to ensure that there's equality spread equally across the United States and beyond, and the urgency, the fierce urgency, as Dr. King said, to do so now, not next year, next session, next election, next generation. And so it's one thing to have all the data and the information. It's another thing to have a voice. Libby, Melissa, Christina, Gwen, and Matt, what a privilege. Thank you so much for joining us at Spectrum.
Thank you.
And I was amiss earlier. I forgot in thanking my great colleagues who've put this on. I left Morgan out. So I want to officially thank the people who really have done so much work. Elizabeth, Phil, Roma, Joelle, and Morgan, among many others, but they have truly put in day and night and day to make this conference happen. And the proof is in the pudding in sessions like this. We will take a half-hour break before our final session, where you will hear from Elizabeth Brady. It is one not to be missed. And we do hope that everyone hopefully will be in person next year. Hopefully. And we do hope to see you at a future Spectrum. So I will go off now and we will give you all a break, and we will see you again at 4:30 here on the East Coast.
Bye, folks.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, everyone.